When you get to be my age, you start to notice similar story elements showing up over and over again in the media you consume. Battle of the Bands, the camping episode, the heist episode, etc. That's not to say that all your favorite shows growing up were constantly ripping each other off. These are examples of tropes, the reliable narrative and character building blocks used to put together your favorite stories, and many of them go back a lot farther than you might think. Even the My Little Pony franchise, which has been around for over 40 years, tried its hand at a lot of story tropes you've seen done other places, but with the characters and settings you've come to know and love. You might have a personal favorite trope that I'd love to hear about in the comments, but there's one trope in particular that I hold very near and dear to me, to an almost embarrassing degree. One that I love almost every time I see it, and one that the My Little Pony franchise has tried almost a half dozen times. I'm talking about Freaky Friday. Freaky Friday, sometimes called a brain switch or a body swap, is the name given to the story trope where two or more characters switch bodies through some magical or scientific means, and in the process of trying to find a way to switch back, learn to better appreciate one another by quite literally walking a mile in the other person's shoes. I am in love with this central conceit. It's hokey and dumb and requires quite a bit of suspension of disbelief, but it's also an emotional layup, a story so hard to get wrong that almost always pays off with a really simple emotional connection between two of the characters, even if you've seen this story done a dozen times before. My Little Pony actually managed to do some really interesting things with such a boilerplate story on more than one occasion, and you're probably already familiar with its most famous example. During my first watch through of the series, I browsed a lot of message boards of people talking about their favorite episodes and moments, and I got embarrassingly excited when one of them mentioned what they called the Freaky Friday episode. I dropped any and all research to avoid spoilers until eventually that story fell on me late in season 3 like a herd of cannibalistic critters.
Terribly sorry, darling. I'm afraid I'm not good with the thundery ones.
No joke, I screamed. I'm not often surprised by this show, but even when I jumped on board, I knew it would be perfect for a Freaky Friday if ever they wanted to do one. It's got all the right ingredients to do the story justice. The first is a variety of characters and personal circumstances. Thanks to Lauren Faust's devout belief that femininity can come in all different styles and flavors, each equally valid, the core cast of Friendship is Magic represents a good array of character archetypes to play around with when it comes to role reversal stories. Bookworm, Wallflower, Farm Girl, Party Girl, Sporty Spice, etc. The second element is some reason for the characters to swap in the first place. If I'm being honest, Freaky Friday is an exercise in character, not an exercise in plot, so it's never been super important what exactly causes the swap, which comes in two primary flavors. Either through magic, like the original Freaky Friday, the 2003 remake, or the 2020 horror adaptation simply titled Freaky, or by science, as seen in Jimmy Neutron, Rick and Morty, or the 2024 horror film It's What's Inside. A lot of horror adaptations, you love to see it. And since sufficiently advanced science and fiction is basically indistinguishable from magic, it doesn't really matter which style you prefer since they both get the job done. Magical Mystery Cure performs the swap with an unfinished manuscript from Star Swirl the Bearded. Toying with it the night before causes a shuffle amongst the elements of harmony that leave everyone, Twilight included, completely thrown off. The only thing left to classify is the permutation that occurs as a result of the swap, which is just a mathematical way of describing who goes where. The vast majority of the time, body swaps are a two-cycle, a strictly two-person operation which focuses on a pair of characters who learn to appreciate one another while trying to undo the swap. Magical Mystery Cure takes on the far more chaotic global scramble, which involves 3 or more characters and sacrifices character development in exchange for increased hijinks. Magical Mystery Cure pins Twilight as the point person, while the rest of her friends swap with this really elegant 5-cycle that manages to give everyone the worst jobs possible. Rainbow Dash is forced to deal with all the critters of Fluttershy's cottage. Meanwhile, Fluttershy has to keep the townspeople in good spirits, Pinkie has to keep the Apple family farm operational, Applejack has to follow in Rarity's fashionable footsteps, and Rarity has to handle the complex systems that are the local weather forecast. By rotating everyone one notch over, Ponyville falls into complete disarray. Some of the ardent purists among you may make the case that Magical Mystery Cure doesn't categorically qualify as a Freaky Friday since no consciousness is being transferred. Pinkie is still Pinkie, Dash is still Dash, etc. All that's really changed is their cutie marks. I heavily disagree, and if you've seen the show, you know exactly why. Think about how you would describe Applejack. You could describe her physical appearance, blonde hair, green eyes, and leg muscles that can take your jaw off. You could also describe her mind. She knows exactly when apples turn ripe, has an extensive knowledge of farming, and knows every member of the Apple family tree. However, when it comes to playing around characters and their identities, there's a secret third thing that only the My Little Pony franchise can do. The cutie mark is a rite of passage amongst ponies in Equestria, a mark bestowed upon ponies when they come of age. It's an unusually philosophical topic in pony culture that could take up an entire episode on its own, but it's this sort of messy amalgamation of that particular pony's personality, vocation, and general talents, which is why it's such a colossal disaster when some fiddling with an old spell causes the main 5 out of 6 to resign themselves to a life dictated by their sudden reversal of fortune. God, that's scary to think about. I really gotta do that Cutie Mark episode. Right out the gate, I'm impressed with the fact that the show even tried a Freaky Friday with the 2/3 of an episode they had around all the Celestia stuff, when this episode was originally meant to be a music-packed series finale before Hasbro ordered a 4th season. During the Act 1 roll call, we get a fun series of gags centered around the girls out of their elements, which are often the focus of more comedic renditions of this trope. But what makes this episode one of my absolute favorite Freaky Fridays in fiction is this emotional core that really slyly reinforces the core lesson of the show. If Friendship is Magic has a core message, it's right there in the subtitle. Friendship is a power like anything else. Not literally, unless you're Cozy Glow, but enough to keep a mixed up group of friends tethered together while their life's purpose erodes out from underneath them. It starts with Fluttershy about to bail on Ponyville altogether when Twilight asks her to help Rainbow Dash one last time.
She's really struggling with her animals.
Even in the face of a completely upended life's purpose, the desire to help her friend persists, and she agrees to help despite her feelings about where her cutie mark has taken her. What follows is a really tender walkback of the 5 cycle that the girls are trapped in, powered solely by their desire to help the ponies that matter most to them. Fluttershy rediscovers her affinity with animals by helping Rainbow Dash avoid getting eaten alive. This frees her up to help Rarity with her Susie and Storm situation, which allows her to teach Applejack how to match fabrics and so on. It's a very tender moment that reinforces the show's larger core message within a standalone episode, which makes this one of my all-time favorites, not just within the MLP franchise, but amongst all body swap media I've ever seen. Stay tuned for MLP Reanimated, where I and 100 different animators are attempting to recreate this amazing episode 10 seconds at a time. You may have noticed that this video is technically a re-upload. That's because there was one glaring omission I made in the first version that absolutely had to get fixed. I don't know how I forgot about an episode with Daybreaker in it, but this isn't a complete examination of Freaky Friday without having talked about a royal problem. In Season 7, Starlight Glimmer is sent to Canterlot by the Cutie map to solve the frankly long overdue issue of the Princesses of the Sun and Moon not appreciating the amount of work the other puts in to keep everything in Equestria running smoothly. Starlight panics and swaps their cutie marks for 24 hours to keep them from falling into the same Nightmare Moon situation that sent Luna away in the first place. Each of them brings their own running theme to this story that makes this episode really stand out on its own. The first is this idea that the rulers of Equestria aren't allowed to be flawed, a bias that Ballerina Twilight repeats throughout the episode. In early MLP, Celestia was more of a figurehead than an actual character, and we didn't get this depth to her until the second half of the series. Her entire waking life has been dedicated to being this competent political figurehead that has it all together and is never allowed to be upset or make mistakes. That really drains a person over time, and this idea that she's not allowed to talk about her feelings means that by the time Starlight gets sent by the map, the sister squabble is already at a boiling point. The second is Luna's belief that a person's dreams are a manifestation of their own thoughts and feelings, and even though they aren't real, they matter to the person or pony having them. This is doubly true when one of the swap participants is an alicorn who can enter people's dreams and has to regularly deal with talking pancakes and ponies' teeth falling out. Ignoring these feelings makes them worse, and they manifest themselves as Daybreaker, a super sick design for Starlight's imagined spot of what might happen to Celestia if her emotions were ever allowed to fall out of control like Luna's did. Talking about your issues with those who care about you is a sign of strength, not weakness, and the entire episode is about getting the 2 most important ponies in Equestria to figure that out. These are ideas that didn't resonate with me on a first watch, but this is actually a really solid episode, and it probably goes up a dozen notches if I were ever to re-rank every episode again. Now that that's out of the way, let's get you back to your regularly scheduled body swaps. 6 seasons later, Friendship is Magic tried a more subdued approach to the body swap after Fluttershy has completely had it with her rabbit turd pet mucking with her job at the sanctuary. This one falls much more in line with the standard Freaky Friday plot structure of the 1976 film, which is itself based on the 1972 book of the same name. Angel Bunny feels underappreciated by his owner Fluttershy, and Shy is completely overwhelmed by his constant grabs for her attention while she tries to attend to a sanctuary full of animals. The instigator this time is a magical potion whipped up by Sakura in order to get Shy and her pet to relate to one another. Sakura's trial by fire approach bears some similar DNA to Pei-Pei's mother working at the Chinese restaurant in the 2003 adaptation of Freaky Friday starring Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis. My personal headcanon is that this magical role reversal is something that Sakura seems to do for kicks, regardless of whether it works any better or worse than talking out these characters' problems. It sucks that we never got to see much more of Sakura as the series waned, because I'm here for this insane version of her that tries to solve everyone's problems with potions instead of therapy. She does tell them to wait until they get home to take the potion, a guideline that Angel promptly ignores. If this telling of the story has an issue beyond Angel being an unsympathetic jerk, it's an awful sense of pacing. The body swap occurs almost halfway through the episode and still manages to feel like it's dragging. Think back to Magical Mystery Cure, which takes only a minute to get going before the cold open is even over. But the idea of a pet swapping places with its owner is relatively fresh, and if they were going to tell this story here, Angel and Shy are the best pony pet pair to use for this kind of message. Otherwise, it's a pretty unremarkable episode outside of dropping unreliable lore hints and tossing them aside.
I talk to animals, I want to marry Discord.
Your list is over there.
So instead, I want to talk about another decision that has to be made whenever you try to do a body swap. In the vast majority of animated takes on this story, it's standard practice to have the voices of the affected person stay with that person's brain, wherever it is. I totally get that this makes no sense in reality. Speech is a physiological skill tied to the vocal cords of the speaker, but keeping the voice and brain together is a really handy shorthand for conveying who is in whose body when the viewer can no longer rely on character models to keep themselves straight. Body swaps in live action, on the other hand, usually make the more realistic decision to keep the character voices tied to their physical bodies, more in line with what would happen if some mad scientist decided to try this for real. What I like about She Talks to Angel is the conscious decision to keep Andrea Libman's voice in Fluttershy's throat. Pragmatically, it makes sense because it means the show didn't have to hire a new voice talent to portray the formerly voiceless Angel in Shy's body. But more importantly, doing things this way offers our favorite physical and voice actors a wonderful acting exercise with which to flex their vocal range in really unique ways.
Really? That's what you're worried about?
In this episode, Andrea Libman maintains Fluttershy's soft vocal timbre while inflecting her words with a faster pace to match a character who has never spoken before and whose vocal patterns we can only speculate on. In basically no time at all, Angel breaks loose all the new forbidden words at his disposal, like Little Dicky squatting in Chris Brown's body. This isn't specific to Freaky Friday as a storytelling device either. I absolutely love it when characters in fiction imitate one another, which happens more than you might think in this show.
Always carry plenty of bits. The Griffins are sure to help you as long as you share the wealth. Oh, I'm so excited I got the wrong pouch! And I know I say excited a lot when I'm actually just kind of excited.
Well, of course I know that. But the truth of the matter is, you should be excited.
Really think about how impressive that last one is. VA Ashley Ball was asked to do an impression of one of her characters doing a bad impression of another one of her characters. It's so impressive to me that someone can portray two different vocal textures simultaneously and earns instant brownie points from me. Freaky Friday as a storytelling device works best in a world with defined characters that the trope can play off of, which is why the version from the original 1986 series didn't really work for me in the one episode that tried a story like this. The 11th story arc of My Little Pony and Friends, a single episode called Mish Mash Melee, sees Gusty, Fizzy, Shady, and Wind Whistler playing polo in the meadow. For the record, if you haven't seen it, these character archetypes are brave, ditzy, unsure, and smarmy know-it-all respectively. There's a test later. While chasing a runaway ball, the gang falls into an underground cave system where they meet the Dell Dwellers, creatures who care for the forest, making rocks, spreading acorns, etc. The gang upsets the literal balance of nature and tip over a barrel of frazzles, hairy little droplets of chaos that scramble everyone's personalities. The chronically unsure Shady is swinging around on vines, Fizzy the ditzy one is now using $10 words, etc. I really appreciate the effort, and I'm an apologist when it comes to most MLP media, but there are a few reasons this one doesn't work for me. The pony half of the episodes from My Little Pony and Friends are only 10 minutes to begin with, which isn't a lot of time to set up a story and get any real mileage out of it. The original series also doesn't have the well-defined characters necessary for this kind of humor to land. The Girl Show Ghetto was way worse 40 years ago, and while it's interesting to see where the show comes from, it's not the fully fleshed out production that those of us under 30 are accustomed to with regards to newer generation series. Most notably, I don't think this qualifies as a Freaky Friday. There's no transference of identity going on here, and even the effects of the frazzles don't scan very well between the show's general lack of clarity and my lack of familiarity with these characters. Which isn't to say that it doesn't scratch a similar itch. The Tell Your Tale episode, As the Misty Clears, features the Gen 5 gang getting emotionally overturned by the evil of Misty's locket tether to Opaline, unleashing polar opposite versions of themselves upon the Crystal Bright House. Zip becomes a megalomaniac, Izzy a brute, Sunny a loner, etc. It was even the subject of Tell Your Tale Reanimated, the collaborative animation I showed off at Ciderfest last year. A character or characters act wildly outside of what you'd expect from them due to circumstances outside their control. I'm thinking of that episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy with the mysterious boomerang that flops the character traits of anyone touching it. Friendship is Magic even did one of those as early as season 2, when Fluttershy takes Iron Will's self-help course a bit too seriously. This can also be a side effect of bad writing, but if it's done for comedic effect, it gets a one-time pass from me. Generation 5 launched September 24th, 2021, and it also tried a pure Freaky Friday twice in its lifetime. The first was right away in Chapter 2 of the Netflix series Make Your Mark, but it wasn't with the two characters I was expecting. The Cutie Mark Mixup features Sparky's transformation magic, swapping the cutie marks of Smoothie Maker Sunny Star Scout and her childhood friend Sheriff Hitch Trailblazer. Nearly immediately, the two of them perform the old standby of trying to do each other's job, but I'm not wild about this one. Once again, the biggest issue I have with this one is pacing. Magical Mystery Cure took place at the end of 3 whole seasons of getting to know G4's new version of Ponyville and its associated world. While at this point, Make Your Mark only had a new generation, 5 previous episodes of Make Your Mark, and a couple dozen episodes of Tell Your Tale to ramp off of, and was still setting up things like the community garden and Opaline's Dragonfire surveillance mission. Because of this, it's nearly 10 minutes into the episode before the swap occurs, which is too sluggish from even a screenwriting perspective to do much interesting with a premise like this. There's also the interesting hiccup of Sunny not having the command over animals of her buddy Hitch, though to be fair, it was already weird back in Friendship is Magic that Fluttershy and Angel was still able to perform the stare, a feature that it also glossed over quite quickly. The Cutie Mark Mix-Up is a sloppy episode, but it was toying with an interesting idea if it had just landed the plane. But if the core Gen 5 TV series dropped the ball when it comes to doing a proper Freaky Friday, the associated comic series picked it back up and pulled off an absolute slam dunk. Outside of some miniseries like Set Your Sail and Camp Big Hoof, the Gen 5 comic book series by IDW ran for 20 issues, capped off by a mammoth 5-issue arc about royal sisters Zip and Pip having their cutie marks swapped with the help of a mischievous overachiever nymph named Milky Way, only days before their annual royal dinner at Zephyr Heights. In terms of both adhering to the tried and true formula while also trying something new, this is the only attempt in the franchise that comes anywhere close to capturing the schmaltzy emotional storytelling delivered nearly perfectly in Magical Mystery Cure. Before I get into the awesome arc written by Celeste Bromfman, I want to give a quick shout out to the awesome expressive artwork by Amy Meverson. Freaky Friday is a pretty simple story, but the entire 5-issue arc punctuates all the right moments with really well-rendered drawings of over-the-top slapstick, emotional devastation, and really resonant catharsis. Rereading this arc made me remember just how talented the team on the Gen 5 comics is, and Amy, as well as colorist Heather Breckel, really nailed what the story needed in all the right places. There are subplots about the hassles of party planning and band rehearsals, and a gut-punchingly realistic story beat about Zip getting cancelled by the only character in the franchise who could give Zephyr Breeze a run for his money in terms of sheer douchebaggery. The biggest swing the story takes, though, is a really fascinating look into the troubled backstory of the antagonist Milky Way, the wish-granting nymph. I won't spoil it here, it's really easy to get your hands on a copy of the entire story and read it for yourself, but they actually made me care about a one-shot character that spends most of the story making you want to punch her lights out. And this is coming from a guy who was just dunking on Angel Bunny 5 minutes ago. The story doesn't completely sideline Sunny, Izzy, and the rest of the gang either, but Zip and Pip definitely take center stage. I consider it required reading for any Gen 5 fan, and it was an awesome arc for the main comic story to go out on. Thanks a lot for letting me gush uncontrollably for the last 15 minutes. I'm a massive simp for Freaky Friday stories, and I really like doing episodes like this, where I talk about how MLP handles blank. I've got a few more fun episodes planned for this year, but if you'll be at Ciderfest, make sure to stop and say hi. Until next time, I'm some horse on the internet. Thanks for watching.